Welcome to Off Meta Analysis, where I take new ideas that aren't currently being used in the meta and analyze their potential, featuring Bequeath. Bequeath is a very controversial move, and for good reason. I'll get into that in a bit, but first of all, if you're experienced with PvP, you can skip to this timestamp to find out what makes Bequeath such a controversial move. Otherwise, keep watching to learn about the basic stuff you should know about this move. When Bequeath first came out, it cost 100 energy, and what it did was that it passed down any stat boost or any scapegoat that it had to the next Loomian that switches in, but the downside was that whichever Loomian used Bequeath would faint. When the devs saw how this move performed, they thought it was too OP, so they had to nerf it. If you haven't watched it already, I've attached a link to my Whippledriff and Rev9 video on the top right of this video, which merely demonstrates the sheer power of Bequeath before the nerf. Okay, so what was the nerf, you ask? Well, after the nerf, Bequeath now costs 50 energy. But wait, isn't that a good thing? Well, the biggest issue about this nerf is that it actually has -6 priority. Priority is a game mechanic that affects which Loomian moves first or moves last in a battle. It is unaffected by speed unless two Loomians use a move with the same priority in battle. By default, all moves have 0 priority, but Bequeath has -6 priority, so it tends to go last. The only other move that would move after Bequeath is Bane of Haste, which has priority of -7. The fastest priority are +2 priority moves, such as dodge, bait, etc. The next fastest priority is +1, with moves such as Quick Pounce, Quick Punch, and Shadow Sprint. Now, negative priority isn't the only nerf that Bequeath got. Before the nerf, Bequeath was also able to pass down scapegoats to the next Loomian that swapped in. However, now it is unable to do that, and you'll see in this clip that after Garbantis gets chips by Icigool's sharp edges, it still takes damage from Dusket, so it's not that the scapegoat can't be seen visually, it's just not there to begin with. So now that the basics have been covered, is Bequeath unusable at the moment? Well, if you played Pokemon, you would know that Bequeath is like Baton Pass. But Baton Pass has neutral priority, passes down scapegoats or substitutes, and it doesn't cause the user to faint. That's a lot better than what Bequeath has to offer, don't you agree? Well, I had a few theories that I want to test out, and one of them has to do with the item Heavy Shackles. Heavy Shackles is an item you can get from Loomian Legacy Coliseum Marketplace, and it costs 48 CPs apiece. According to its description, it says that it will tend to move after all other Loomians in a battle. So I decided to do a little experiment and see if Bequeath moves faster than a Loomian with Heavy Shackles. I want to say thank you to Neon Disguise for helping with this experiment. So anyways, I bartered Heavy Shackles onto Zulong and then swapped into my Whippledriff to see if its Bequeath outspeeds the Heavy Shackles Zulong, and well, let's just say that the experiment failed. But I didn't stop there. Zulong is known to be faster than Whippledriff, so I decided to barter the Heavy Shackles onto a slower Loomian like Sedimars. And that experiment was also a fail. You lied to me, Llama Train Studios. So obviously my experience didn't work out too well, but if it did, then it could have potentially changed the way in which teams are built around Whippledriff. However, Whippledriff isn't the only Loomian that gets access to Bequeath. Actually, Wiki-Wiki gets this move, and it is probably better off with Bequeath than Whippledriff is, which is kind of embarrassing considering that Whippledriff was the first one to gain access to this move. What makes Wiki-Wiki so special? Well, for starters, it gets the move Hypnotize. Now what this means is that if the opposing Loomian is asleep, Wiki-Wiki can safely Bequeath onto the next Loomian without getting damaged. It also gets the move Scapegoat for extra security when bequeathing, but as discussed before, it can't pass down the Scapegoat to the next Loomian. Another good thing about Wiki-Wiki is that it has pretty decent bulk. Its capability of taking melee hits is slightly worse than Whippledriff, but it is much better at taking range hits than Whippledriff is. There's this one strategy that I saw some guy use in the Battle Coliseum where he braces on Wiki-Wiki and then just bequeaths onto a Garbantis, and I thought that was really cool, so I quickly rallied this Wiki-Wiki and Garbantis pair that I showed earlier on in this video. This is a really good combo because Garbantis gets a move known as Battering Ram, which deals damage based on its melee defense rather than its melee attack. And it's just even more brutal because Garbantis is a naturally fast Loomian, and when you give it very nimble, it will be outspeeding most of the Loomians in the current metagame. And once Wiki-Wiki bequeaths all those braces onto Garbantis, Battering Ram will do massive damage. I just thought it was a really fun gimmick to see, and I highly recommend it because it's so much fun to use, but don't use it in an actual competitive battle. Gimmicks are gimmicks for a reason. My final thoughts on Bequeath is that at its current state, it won't perform very well competitively, but it is still super fun to use, especially with the Wiki-Wiki and Garbantis gimmick. I strongly believe that Bequeath needs a buff, but I do agree that initially, Bequeath needed a nerf, since Whippledriff and Revenine were too strong. If I were to buff it, I would try several things. My first idea is to make it so that Bequeath halves any damage dealt to the user before bequeathing. My second idea is to add an item in the game known as Focus Sash, which is like Clutch, except it's in the form of an item. My final idea is to make it so that heavy Shackle users move after Bequeath. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video. Be sure to like and subscribe if you did, because it really helps. Thanks a lot. See ya.